And oh, thank you, Eric. Okay, John's presentation on how you can take your cell phone and make a photograph from that turn out to be a piece of art. So John, why don't you introduce yourself, tell people a little bit about your background, go right into your presentation.
Thanks, George. Wait a minute. That's better. So, hi everybody. Thanks for joining. And let me get my screen adjusted here.
Looks like Jody has a question.
And
I wonder if Stephanie can mute her. Just never
Now
mind.
you just muted it, Stephanie.
Yeah, if
Good.
everybody could mute their microphones unless they actually want to talk. And if you're not familiar with this, if you press your space bar, then you can talk. And then when you release the space bar, it mutes the microphone again. So it's real easy to keep yourself on mute. And then if your dog starts to bark or your grandkids leave from just now, it won't interrupt everybody. All right, and so a quick intro. So I'm John Phelps. I'm a recent Nevadan. I came from Texas, and before that, Wisconsin, and before that, New York, and actually was born in Rochester, New York, in the shadow of a company called Eastman Kodak that you may have heard about. So that was the place to get employed. And when I graduated from college, that's where I worked. And I worked there for 26 years until Kodak kind of went down the drain, and so did my free film, unfortunately. But I had taken photography courses in college. I had taken all kinds of workshops. I'm way overeducated as far as photography. And then with the loss of free film, I kind of got out of it until digital came along. And I picked up on that. Loved it ever since. So my current life stored images is the fault of a guy by the name of Nathan. I took a workshop from him when I was in college. And he talked about all the great photographers and how photography was really being recognized as an art. And he said, I want you to save every picture you've ever taken because, hey, you never know. So I took that to heart. And now we have one closet filled with totes with slides and prints that I haven't looked at in 10 years. I probably will never look at again, but hey, you never know. And I've got almost 175,000 digital images stored. And I can go back. In fact, the picture we're going to work on tonight, I took 8 years ago. I can go back immediately, find it. I can tell you where I took it. I can tell you when I took it. I can tell you the context that it was taken in. And I can do that for every picture I've taken since, except for a lot of junk that should have been thrown away. And with any kind of luck, someday I will. But hey, you never know. All right, so I'm gonna switch over to Photoshop. Oh, a couple of quick questions or a couple of quick things before we get going. First, how many of you guys already have Photoshop? How many of you actually got it on your hard drives? So I know Mary does, George does, Pant does. All right, so the guys what I want to do is I want to set this up so that you guys that have had some experience with Photoshop are interested and may learn something. And you guys that are not that familiar with Photoshop are not like totally overwhelmed by it. So what I'd like you guys to do is help me with that level. Please ask questions, interrupt me at any point. And what we'll do is we'll steer this in the direction that's going to help you better understand whether or not you want to use Photoshop and how you can do some really interesting things with it. I was in the studio one afternoon, and there was a guy there who was tutoring a woman, and she was working, I think it was acrylics, maybe it was oils. And she was working on something. We got to chatting about photography and whether photography was an art. And that's something that always gets me going. It kind of rings my bell. And anyway, he said, well, one of the things about painting is you can put anything anywhere you want. But with photography, you're stuck with pretty much what it looked like when you took the picture. All right, so we're going to put that to bed tonight. That ain't true. And so we're going to have some fun working on that. So before I get started and bring up Photoshop and get roaring along here, do you guys have any questions?
Yeah, just a quick question.
Yeah,
All
Pat.
those thousands of pictures, are you going to talk about where we can store that many photos? Like what kind of
Yes,
storage
I'm going to really briefly hit on that, but that might not be a bad topic for a workshop some other time.
Cool.
Because it's when you first start to get into digital photography, if you don't have a specific way to keep track of your stuff, at first it's no big deal. And then after a while, it's like, oh my God, do I have to go back and try to figure out where all this stuff belongs? And how do I store this? And there's some very easy ways to do that. And actually, I got started doing videos about 6 years ago. And I was lucky enough to find a YouTube video that explained how to organize your assets for doing videos. And I'll tell you, if I hadn't listened to that and taken like furious notes and stuff, I would be overwhelmed trying to do videos, because videos are like another level more complicated than doing something with Photoshop. But yeah, to your point, yeah, that'd be an excellent topic. It really would. In fact, there's a product I use called ACDC. It's very inexpensive, and it allows you to index and keep track of all your pictures, put keywords on them. And it also allows you to do a lot of editing. And kind of to George's point, some of it's just like one-click editing. It's so easy. You don't have to use Photoshop. You know, Photoshop is a dump truck, and sometimes all you need is to open the trunk in your SUV to carry your groceries, right? You don't need a dump truck. But tonight we're using the dump truck. We'll get the forklift out. We're going to do the whole thing. Do the whole works. All right. So good question. Other questions before we get going here? All right, cool. I'm going to share my screen. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to put the chat window over on the far right side. And if you want to interrupt me, just interrupt me. Just like, push the space bar and have at it. If you want to type a question or something in the chat window, go ahead and do that. And then eventually I'll see it or somebody else will see it, and then they'll interrupt me. But again, I want to steer this in the direction that's going to be helpful and valuable to you. So if you don't interrupt me, you're just going to listen to me rattle on. All right, so let me share my screen. All right, and I'm going to bring this down over here. And I'm going to get rid of me, because otherwise I just look at me. That's self-view. Good. All right, I don't want that. All right, cool. All right, so Photoshop. Not very exciting when you first open it up. So what we're going to do is we're going to work on a picture, as I said, that I took 8 years ago. And this picture won Best of Show in the recent photography show that we had over the summer. And I think it was Carla. We had been talking about let's do some photo classes, let's do some online stuff, and I said, what would be valuable? And she looked at me and she smiled and she said, you know what I want to know is I want to know how you did that picture that won Best of Show. So that's what we're going to do tonight. And this is the original picture. And what I did here is I actually was at an art gallery. It was it's called Roadside Relics, and it's in Austin, Texas. And that place was closed, and it was some afternoon. I don't remember what day it was, but I walked around the side and looked in the window, and this is what I saw. It was just fabulous. And so I'm like there, and I'm taking the lens hood off my camera so I can get the camera right square up against the window, and taking my t-shirt and wiping the window off to get all the dirt off the window. And I took a whole bunch of pictures of this, and I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but I thought, wow, that is just surreal. That is so cool. And so that's how I got started on this. And so what we're going to do is let's take a look at the picture that won Best of Show. That was it right there. All right, we'll come back and we'll go back again. And this is one of these things where it kind of carries on the surreal thing, because you look at that seat there and you say to yourself, yeah, you're going to get 6 people on that without, some more legs in the middle somewhere. But that's kind of the fun. That's kind of the fun of doing it. And you can see that, well, let me show you what the goal was here. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to get rid of these edges, because when I stuck my camera up against the window, I couldn't, fill the frame here. So what I want to do is I want to get rid of this, and I want to get rid of this over here. And this display case, it's just kind of a distraction and it doesn't really match the color palette. And then the sunlight on the floor was kind of a distraction too. And then the other thing, of course, I wanted to do is I wanted to extend the seating. And I confess, I didn't think to myself, oh, let's make 6. I think I started out with 4 and then I went to 5 and I thought, well, 5 is good. 6 is even better. So I managed to fit 6 in before it fell out of the end of the frame. So that kind of brings up the point that working on this kind of stuff is a very iterative process. It's not like you go ahead and you do it once. At least I don't go ahead and do it once and then step away and I'm done with it. I'll work on a little bit and I'll come back to it. I'll work on a little bit and come back to it. And compared to the days, which was long ago, that I did painting, one of the things I love about Photoshop is I don't actually have to do any cleanup. There's no brushes to be cleaned. There's no palette to be wiped off. You know, it's like I can start clean again. And that brings up a point, kind of a best practice thing. What I'll do is when I'm working on something like this, I want to be able to figure out where I got the picture from. And so if you look up here in the upper left corner, you'll see it says _DSC 6355. That's the file name that the camera put on the original image when I took it. So that was actually assigned by the camera. And I always leave the original file names on here so I can go back and I can find them. And then if I'm actually working on editing it, what I'll do is I'll put today's date on it. And then the other thing I'll do is I'll put a descriptor on there. So this was the final one. I did a lot of prep work getting ready for this, as you can imagine. And so this is the final one that I ended up working on. And so, well, no, I'm going to get up in the weeds, and we can spend a lot of time talking about file management and asset management and stuff, and that will get us off in the weeds, and we won't get through this. All right. So, any questions about the original here, and then the plan? All right, let's press on here. All right. So the first thing I did here is I wanted to select the objects that are in the frame. All right, so let's bring this up again here. So the objects I wanted to work with, I wanted to work with the longhorn skull. I wanted to work with the thank you sign and the hula lamp and the mid-century modern chair, along with the seating here. So I had those 4 objects. And so what I needed to do is I needed to select those objects. And let's come over here, turn that off. All right, and there's many ways you can select these objects, some difficult, some really easy. And I got a confession to make. I'm kind of a lazy guy. I want to get to the result as quick as I can. And so I've learned that if you use a thing called Topaz Remask, which is just an add-in for Photoshop, I can pull these things out really, really fast. And I'll show you. So, right here. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this layer. I'm going to kill this layer mask. Whoops, I'll undo that. All right, so you're going to see me do and undo stuff a lot. That's just kind of goes with the territory here. All right. All right, so now that I've got a copy of that, let me show you how to extract these really easily. I'm going to come up here to filter, and I'm going to go down here to Topaz Labs, and I'm going to pick Mask AI. So it's an AI app. It's not cheap, but it's not real expensive either. I think it's like $79. And so you come in here and you have a green palette and you have this little blue circle. And so what I'm going to do is reduce the size of my circle a little bit. And then I'm going to pull out this thank you sign. And all I'm going to do is just highlight around the edges of it. Hold my shift key down to draw straight lines. And that's it. All right, now I have to tell it what I want to get rid of and what I want to keep. So the green stuff is what I want to keep. The purple stuff here is the edges, the borders, and the red stuff is what I want to get rid of. So what I want to get rid of here is everything outside the sign. So I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to come down here to compute mask. And it'll take a couple of seconds to do this. It always takes longer if you're waiting for it and you're doing a presentation. All right, there it goes. All right, and so here's my original image. This is called my try map, and here's what I've extracted. So when I click on apply down here in Photoshop, it just takes it back over. It creates a new layer in Photoshop. It's just that sign. And I can do exactly the same thing with the longhorn, with the seating here, and with the hula lamp and the mid-century modern chair. So really easy. Photoshop has a select and mask tool, which I just don't think works as well as this. It isn't as easy. It's not as intuitive. And damn, you can just spend all day fighting to try to do something like this. And so I'm real happy with doing this kind of approach. And you can actually save these maps. They're called try maps. If I load this try map in here. All right, so that's the finished map right there. You can see how I've selected the thank you. I've got the lamp and the chair, I got the seating here, and I've got the longhorn. And you don't have to be fanatical about outlining with the purple line. You can be pretty general. It's pretty smart about what to keep and what to get rid of. And when we're doing a composite here, I don't really want hard edges on most things. I really want kind of a soft edge, particularly when it's something where I'm going to try to merge with a wall or something. Like around here, I don't want a sharp edge on this because otherwise I'll have to remove it and I'll be fighting with it. I'd much rather have a soft edge. And so because the purple is mostly reasonably wide here, I'm going to get a sharp, or I'm sorry, a soft edge. And now if I want to make this edge a little thin over here, so if I want to make that bigger, I just come up here like that. That's kind of colorful to work with. And like, it's just like crazy easy. So I click compute mask and it drops me back into Photoshop and it creates a new layer for me. And the new layer looks like that. All right. Everybody with me so far?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And then once I've got this, then I can separate these guys into separate layers so I can deal with them separately. I can deal with them separately here, but it's more challenging if you do it this way rather than just put them in separate layers. So I always put separate objects in separate layers.
John, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
That Topaz app, excuse me, can you install that on a, what is it, AC5 version of Photoshop?
I don't know.
Okay.
Short answer. They do have a standalone version of it. So the version I've got here is like built right into Photoshop as an extension, but they have a standalone version of it. And if I was doing this, and I had an older version of Photoshop, that's what I would do, is I would use the standalone version. I think when you buy it, you get the Photoshop add-in, and you also get the standalone version at the same time.
Okay.
And this does a fabulous job. Not only does it do a great job on hard edge objects, like you can see it, it's done a pretty nice job finding the edge of that seating there, and around the longhorn as well. I mean, it's nice and sharp. And I specifically said, don't go after the chain here. I'm going to manually pull that chain out of there. Sometimes little finicky things like that, it's better to do some manual work with it. But it did a nice job on the sign, and it also did a really nice job over here with the lamp and the seating. All right, so I got my objects selected. And what I want to do is I want to take that back wall and I want to move these objects around on the back wall. So there's a bunch of ways you can do that. But what I really want to do, again, remember that I'm a lazy guy when I do this stuff. I really want the back wall to look like this, and then I can put them anywhere. And so the idea is with the original objects, I've pulled them out completely, and then I have to fill the holes in where they were. So if we come over here, I turn this on and that off. I turn that off. So here's what I start with. So here's everything's been removed. I just have the back wall. And so now I can really dig in and do some quick editing. And we're going to go to build the back wall. Turn off this. All right, so what's the best way to show you about building this wall? Let's come back. And I'm not going to take you through every click because you'll be glad that I didn't. Some of the stuff can be pretty time consuming. All right, as you might imagine. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a copy of this. I'm going to apply this mask and I'm going to make a copy of it. And that brings up another kind of best practice thing. Anytime you do something where there's some risk that you could lose your data or something, I always make a duplicate. All right, so that way I just can't lose anything. And so now if I go here and apply that mask. There we go. All right. So now this is where the magic happens. This really is magical. Let me make that a little bit smaller. First thing I want to do is I want to stretch this out. I want to get rid of these sides, right? I don't need that wall, and I don't want the stuff over on the right-hand side either. So all I'm going to do is just grab the handle and I'm going to stretch it out. All right, I'll do the same thing over on this side here. And I'm just going to go to there because I don't want the wall to get too distorted. It still looks pretty good. And now this is where the ooh ahs go. You guys, feel free to like go off mute and go ooh ah, because we're going to do a content aware fill. Prepare for the ooh ahs. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I'm going to select this sign right here. Right, remember, I want to fill that wall in. Now, there's a whole bunch of different ways I could do that, but the easiest way by far is to go fill, content aware, okay. Ooh, ah.
That was great.
So is that fabulous or what? So not only, let me deselect it here, not only does it do a great job filling that in, but it maintains the texture. It somehow figures out the texture from what's around it. And if there's gradients and stuff, it also fills in the gradients. Now, if you guys have worked a lot with Photoshop, you know trying to copy gradients is just the hardest thing ever. To try to make that look convincing, it's just painful. But this thing just does a fabulous job. And what I find is that it works best if I don't try to do everything at once. If I try to do everything at once, it gets a little crazy around the edges. So, I'll just select that and I'll come up to Edit, Fill, Content Aware. Okay, boom, gone. And just keep nibbling my way at it here. So Edit, Fill, Content Aware, Fill, blink, and it's gone. Just couldn't be more convincing. You'd never know that wasn't what it looked like originally.
You're going to make me buy Photoshop again.
I feel like the Adobe salesman. George, you haven't seen anything yet. Wait till you see the next feature. All right. So, and then you can do, there's another one that's kind of cool too. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the patch tool over here. This is another one of the AI tools. And so I don't want this cabinet here. Now I come over and I'm going to highlight this cabinet to select it. And now I want to be a little bit careful because I don't want to get that sunshine on the bottom. And I'm going to come up here and I'm going to select the cabinet. And watch this. This is another ooh-ah moment. I'm going to take this and I'm going to drag it over here. And I'm going to line up the floor because straight lines can be tricky. So I'm going to line that floor up, but I'm going to release. And it does a content-aware fill, taking that cabinet out. So now you'll notice, you guys that are eagle-eyed, let me zoom in a little bit here on this here. You guys that are eagle-eyed will see that it's replicated this pattern here. So there's another really nice tool. It's really easy to use. It's called the clone stamp tool. And what this one does is this will let you take one part of a canvas and it'll let you stamp it over to another part. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to sample this spot right here. You can see my little target right here. And I'm going to drag it over this particular part here that's duplicated. I'm going to click it, and it's going to say you can't use it because you're on the wrong layer. I bet I know what it is. Let's try that. There you go. So it's not quite perfect. So I can do it again. And do it again. There you go. Now it's a little bit light, so I can come down here and I can grab a bit. It's just a little darker. And I'm going to reduce the opacity a little bit. You guys that are painters know all about opacity. I'm going to reduce the opacity a little bit, and I'll just hit that, and there you go. Absolutely convincing. And so sometimes when you get a little OCD, you can go around and you can kind of like fill those sorts of things in like that. All right. So you guys get the idea here.
Yes.
All right, cool. All right, so we're gonna turn that off. And we got our back wall here. All right, now let's talk about the seating. So what I'm gonna do is turn this on, and I'm gonna zoom out just a little bit. All right, there you go. All right, so you can see what I've done here is I've taken the chair and the lamp and I've dragged it over to the edge here, right? Because you'll remember, let's see if I can bring up the original one here. In the original one, where you can see where the white outline is here, all I did is I just took that object and I just dragged it over. All right, and that couldn't have been easier. And because the edge of that wall was right here at the back of the chair, it couldn't have been easier. I just dragged it over to there and was good to go. And because I didn't have a sharp edge on here, it didn't really need any adjustments. I could just take the object as it had been pulled out by Topaz and just plop it down in there. And again, it was utterly convincing.
John, how
Yes, sir.
come there's no distortion?
Say again?
How come there's no distortion?
How come there's no distortion? I don't understand what you mean.
When you're pulling your images, when you're stretching your images out, there's no distortion.
Well, remember, I only stretched the back wall. There is some distortion in the back wall, maybe 15%. But because I pulled the objects out before I stretched the back wall, you don't see it.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, in fact, I can bring in, let me turn on the original here. And I'll turn off the back wall. And if you look at the crack on the back wall, and if you look at some of the little objects on the back wall, when I bring the blank in, you'll see how they've elongated. This one's, let me zoom in on this one right here. If you look at this one right here, this one's elongated, right? So that's what it looks like after stretching. That's what it looks like before stretching. All right, so you don't really notice it. It's really subtle. Good call though. But yeah, if I had done the stretching before I extracted the objects, you're right, the objects would be all kind of wonky. And it's not like you can't bring them back, but it's a nuisance. And again, being a lazy guy doing this, I try to avoid having to do more work than I need to. All right, so let's come back over here. All right, so we talked about the lamp and the chair. Let's talk about the seating here. All right, so what I did, let me turn these off here. 1, 2, 3. All right, so what I did is I started out with all 3 seats, and I used a layer mask right here to remove the legs here. Right, and so if I disable the layer mask, oh, there's my legs right there. But it's way more fun without the legs. All right, so we're gonna enable that again. And then what I did is I took the other side, I took the left-hand side here, and I moved it over and copied it again, same kind of thing. And then I had 3 here, and I actually had 3 here. And so what I did is I took this particular seat right here, and I cloned it all by itself, and then I just used it again and again and again going across. All right, so I can pull that out so you can see that a little better. All right, and so I just came down here and I covered up this guy right here. And now you can see they don't, let me zoom in here for you. They don't line up quite right. So I just slowly and patiently slide it over. Here we go. We're getting close. We're getting close. There we go. That looks good. And when you're doing this kind of thing, the hardest thing that you're going to struggle with beyond gradients is straight lines. And so I'm always conscious of where my straight lines are. So when I line stuff up, I want to make sure I get my straight lines right as much as possible. You can use the clone stamp tool and you can go in and you can set these straight lines back. But man, it's a labor of love doing that. You can really spend a lot of time doing it. So I try to get it right as much as I can. And then what I noticed, let's come down here and look at this. It was all looking good, but the legs seemed to not only is this an impossible seating arrangement, but also the legs don't actually touch the floor. They're actually floating. So I went back and I got the legs off the original, just made a quick copy of the legs off the original, and I pasted those in. And so now you get legs that are just sharp enough so that they look convincing. And there you go. All right. So now we got two more components, right? All right. So now let's take a look at our Longhorn here. So the Longhorn comes in looking like that. And, oops, there we go. Okay, the Longhorn comes in looking like that. And there were a couple of things I wanted to do to the Longhorn to make him look a little more convincing. Let me make him a little bit bigger. First, he just kind of sits there and he's not as three-dimensional as I wanted him to be. And so I used a thing called a drop shadow. And so what do we got here? And for some reason or other, I can't, oh, there it goes. I can't turn it back on. All right, so this is subtle, but this is the kind of thing that it sort of sells the image, where you begin to get these tiny little details that make it really look convincing. So here it is, no drop shadow. There it is with the drop shadow. It's just a little tad darker. Can you see that? Is that something that's you guys can see, or is that just
I can see it.
you can see? Okay, I wasn't sure whether Zoom would pick up that level of detail or not. Okay, and then the next thing was that I needed to do some work on the chain up here, and so I actually went in manually and created a layer mask on that one right here. And actually went in kind of finicky, just pulled that out because I really wanted that to be razor sharp. And so that came out okay. And now back on the original, the artist in his studio actually had like a red light behind the skull, and it had this nice red glow to it. So what I did, let's turn this guy off, is I just went in and I created a red glow. And I picked this up right off the side, off the neon sign. And so I just put that there, and then I just had the Longhorn right on top of it. So you just get this nice subtle red glow around the edges. It looks like there's a light bulb behind him. And because it sits below the Longhorn, then the drop shadow also shows up. Again, this is very subtle, but it makes it look really three-dimensional.
John, I have another question.
Yes, sir.
Can you use your cell phone photograph and go in and do this?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. In fact, we could do a whole thing on editing with cell phones. Yeah, there's what I'm doing here. This camera that I was using at the time, it was a Sony NEX7, and your cell phone camera is a much better camera than what I was using to take this picture. So remember, this was 8 years ago, and in fact, I got to tell you, I probably take 3/4 of the pictures I take are taken with my phone these days because it does such a fabulous job. But yeah, there's no difference in editing technique whatsoever. All right, so how are we doing here? Let's take a look. Let's zoom out. All right, it's looking good. Our longhorn looks pretty convincing. You can see the chain that seems to match up pretty good. Got a nice red glow behind the longhorn here. And then got one more thing to do on the longhorn here. I'll turn this off and you'll see it immediately. There's no cord, right? So there's a light there, but there's no cord for it. So what I did is I went in and I put a cord, an electrical cord in, and I used the pen tool. And I'm not going to talk at all about how to use the pen tool. That's a black hole. But what's really kind of cool about it is that after I drew the line with the pen tool, I was able to go into the liquefy tool and I was able to make this thing just a little wiggly so that it really looks like an electrical cord hanging there rather than just like, this graphic arts line going down through the page. So again, this is just one of those details that really helps sell it. And then you'll see, if you look down here, you'll also see how it goes down behind the cushions here. In fact, if I disable the layer mask here, that was what the original one looked like. And so I went and I created the layer mask and I just masked out the wires so it looked like it was behind the seating. All right. All right, so our longhorn is ready to go. And our next step is the sign. All right, we're going to turn all this off. All right, we're going to start there. All right, so here's what the sign looked like coming in. You'll remember that it was right up against the wall. And it didn't have this nice gradation as it kind of had this, it was kind of bent on the side here. And I wanted to, since it was in the middle of the wall, in order to be convincing, it needed to have the same thing. And this is working with gradients, and this was really the hardest part for me. It's such a subtle thing, and yet this is really was a challenge for me to get this so I was comfortable with it. But first thing I did is I went and I actually made a copy of this over here. I made a copy of the left-hand side and I pasted it over on the right-hand side. And then I just did a transform and I flipped it horizontally. So at least I got the right shape. And then the trick is to how do you match the gradients? And so I did that with a couple of steps. The first thing I did is I did a curves and I darkened this down a little bit, but it still didn't match up right here. It's probably the right tone on the right-hand side, but where it comes up against the main part of the sign, it was still a little wonky. So what I did is I did a gradient, and I did a gradient between this color here and this color here. And I came up with that. And so with a magnifying glass, I'm still not wildly enthusiastic about it. I think it could use maybe a little more work, but overall it looks pretty good. Of course, when you call it out and everybody's staring at it, like, oh yeah, it didn't really quite work right. But that was actually a pretty difficult thing because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to blend across two different gradients, and there's also some texture involved, and gosh knows I could get better at doing that. So this is always something where you look at it, you say, I could have done that better. All right, and then exactly the same technique was used for the electrical line here. All right, so I used the pen tool, I drew a line, I drew it in front of the couch here, in front of the seating, and used the liquefy tool, and I squished it a little bit so it got kind of wiggly, and it looked like the real deal. And then I carried it on so it kind of disappears down here at the floor. All right. So those are our four different components. Now we're not quite there yet because now we got the components. I've got them all on the background. It looks pretty convincing. If you spend a lot of time studying it, you can see some places where there's duplicate patterns that probably could get fixed, but not trying to be too fanatical about it or too OCD about it. So now you got to decide, what do you want this to look like? And so now you got to think about your audience, and you got to think where it's going to be displayed. And so I knew this was going to be displayed in the gallery. And I knew that the lighting in the gallery can be kind of a challenge. Some spots are really brilliantly lit and just are great, and some spots are a little dark. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to maybe make this just a little bit lighter so that I had a little more shadow detail. And then if it did get stuck in one of the darker areas, then it wouldn't look like it was just too dark. And so what I did is I went into Camera Raw and I did this to it. So what I've done here is I've brought up, we could bring up Camera Raw here. This is something that you would use a lot. So Camera Raw filter. And what this does is this allows you to change things across the entire image really easily. So like, for example, and these are, if you've done photo editing before, these are really familiar tools. I've got color temperature here. I've got tint. I've got exposure. So for example, if I want to make the exposure one stop brighter, I drag this out to 1. Right, and clearly too bright. Or if I want it one stop darker, I drag it over here, so clearly too dark. All right, and if I double click on it, it just goes to 0, which is nice. What's nice about this is I can adjust the highlights. So if I just want to do something with the highlights, like for example, let's say I want to just brighten the highlights up just a little bit. There you go. And the shadows, if I want to bring those up, I can bring those up just a little bit. So you can see as I do this, it's kind of a proportional thing. It doesn't do the whole image, it just does the darker tones. And then where the real action is in clarity and texture. So texture is just what it sounds like. What it is, this is actually micro contrast. And what this does is this makes your image look just a little grungy. And if I go all the way to the top, it almost looks like, yeah, you want to wash it off. And then clarity is mid-tone contrast, which does the same kind of thing, but it may not be quite so dramatic. Right, but you can get the same kind of thing out of this, and these are subtle changes. These are like changes that you make to affect the emotional impact of your image. Right, if you do it real bright and airy, then that has one emotion to it, and if you do it kind of dark and moody, that has a completely different emotion to it. And you can do a lot of stuff in here. I mean, yeah, a lot of people only use this. You'll see people who use Adobe Lightroom, and when they're doing their editing, they're using Camera Raw. Great tool. Use it a lot. It's got curves, it's got detail for sharpening, and all kinds of things. You can make adjustments for your lens distortion, like if you're taking a picture of a brick wall and you want all the lines to be horizontal, you don't want it to look like it's a pincushion, then you can adjust your optics based on the lens you're using. It's really a fabulous tool. But what I use it for is I use it for kind of effect. So again, this is after all the editing work, and this makes it just a little grungier, a little bit better if it's got to go in a darker corner. And then there's a number of other tools that do this kind of thing with one click. So kind of to your point, George, about editing your phone with your phone pictures, there's some great tools out there that you can download for free that will let you do this sort of thing with your phone pictures. And there's one called Snapseed. And if you haven't played with Snapseed before, it's a free download, and you can really have some fun with that with your phone pictures. It does the same kind of thing that you just see. It gives you that kind of grungy look, which kind of pumps up your mid-tone contrast. All right, so one of the products that I've played with a little bit is from a company that makes this product called Luminar, and actually they're in the Ukraine. And so I thought at the time it was a good idea to support them. I think it's probably still is. And so anyway, I bought this thing. And so this allows me to have a slightly different look. So here's my original, and this is a different grungy kind of look. And again, this is a one-click thing. It's not like I did anything to it. I just took the original image, put it in, pushed the button, and out it came. And so that it makes it a little darker, a little grungier. And then I've also got a thing from Topaz. It's different than the Remask thing that I showed you earlier, but they also have a number of one-click tools. And if I do that, this really gives it an interesting look to it. Not only does this make it look even grungier, it makes it look like it's printed on maybe old paper or maybe an old blueprint or something. It gives this kind of bluish green tint. And it also does this something interesting with the edges. So then, it's totally a judgment call on your part. What do you like as far as doing some processing to get like an emotional appeal in the picture as opposed to just the literal image that you had originally? And so again, the one that I actually used in the show was this one. That's what we ended up with. So quick review. Let me shut all these guys off. Come back down here to the original. There's what we started out with, right? Stone wall over here, kind of a raggedy ass edge. The sign had that same raggedy ass edge, and so did the chair here. Display case over here, sunlight on the floor. And again, you can see a little bit of red tint behind the longhorn here.
John, you didn't show how you got rid of the daylight on the floor.
Yeah. Let's do that. Let's grab, I'm going to grab this one right here. And I'm going to duplicate that layer. All right, and I'm going to go in here and I'm going to highlight what I want to remove. All right, and so there's a number of tools you can use to highlight it. I'll just use this rectangular highlight tool here. Gives me a pretty precise edge on it. All right, so I selected what I want to remove. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here to edit. And I'm going to click on fill. And I'm going to do content aware fill. There's a number of other fills you can do. I don't know what they're for. I use content aware. All right, and color adaptation is turned on. You don't need to mess with any. These are all the defaults. And I click OK, and you stand back, and I've got a mess on my hands. All right, so this is the kind of thing that you're going to run into if you try to do this without looking at what's around the edges. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back. I'm going to undo that. You'll do lots of undos. And let's see what the easiest way to do this. Let's do this. What's the easiest way to do this? It's a good question, George. Just gonna put me on the spot rather than doing it all quick step by step. All right, so what I'm going to do, let's do this. I'm going to stretch this edge out. I want to get rid of this. What I want to do is I want to get rid of this black wall because I know what's going to happen is as soon as I try to remove the white, it's going to continually pick up that black wall. So I'm going to come over here like that. So then I got less to remove. All right, now I've stretched all the objects out, and I wouldn't do it this way, but I want to just answer your question here. All right, so let's come over here and zoom in so you can see this a little bit better. All right, so let's see if we can do it a step at a time. Let's see if this works better. So I'm going to come over here, and I'm just going to pick this guy out over here. Get over here far enough. All right, so I'm using the lasso tool here. All right, so I selected that. And then I'm going to come over here to edit, fill, content aware fill. Let's see how that works. There you go. Sweet. All right, so that's one way to do it. And that should have a pretty convincing edge on it as well. Yep, not bad. All right, so I'm going to do it another way, George, because one of the things that's kind of cool about Photoshop is you can do lots of things a number of different ways. Now I'm going to use the patch tool, which is really related to that, except that lets me pick where I want to get the source, or I'm sorry, the target from. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to highlight this guy over here. All right, and now what I can do is I can say, okay, what do I want to put in that spot? I know that I want to take that spot and I want to change it, but what can I put in there? So I'm going to come over here on the floor. And maybe I'll come down here. Let's just look. That looks like it's a pretty close match right there. Let's click there. And there you go. Now, if I undo that, now you'll see exactly what you do. Now, suppose what I do is I put it right there on the edge of the couch. Watch what happens. I still get the same thing. All right, that was a bad example. Let's undo that. Let's see if we can do the longhorn. No, it's so never mind on that one. Anyway, the point is here, there's really two ways we've done this, right? One is the content aware fill, where I select an area and say fill that and use the stuff around the edges to figure out what needs to go in the middle. And the other is the patch tool that says, okay, take this and then move over to somewhere else in the picture and grab that. And I'm not quite sure why it didn't work, but sometimes Photoshop will do stuff like that just to mess with you. All right, and so the patch tool is perfect for getting rid of the cabinet here. So I'm going to come over here and just draw around this cabinet quick and bring it back up to the top here. All right, so I got the cabinet selected. Now all I do is just click on my source there and just take it over so it disappears completely. Now, one of the things I want to do is I want to have the floor line up. Right. If I got the floor in the wrong position, then it's hard to get the floor straightened out. So I'm going to come over here and the floor lines up pretty nicely. And the rest of it doesn't really make any difference. And I'll just click there and it's going to be smart enough to fill it in. Now, I didn't do a perfect job on it. This area right here is still a little bit light. But, you know, no reason why we can't just come back, select that and drag it over here and say, yeah, that would look pretty good, but I want it a little bit darker. And come over there and it looks a lot darker, looks a lot better. And this over here, this could match a little better too. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to grab that right there. Looks like that should work pretty good. All right, so there you go. That's not too bad. And now when I took out the cabinet, you can see it replicated this right here. So I can go into the clone stamp tool and I can just stamp that out of the way, or I can just use my patch tool and say, let's use that right there. It's gone. Isn't that cool?
Very good.
And you know, there's a YouTube video. There's not one YouTube video. There's thousands of YouTube videos that explain this stuff in detail. And I got to tell you that an awful lot of this I learned just by sitting watching YouTube videos. There was 4 or 5 guys that are really good. In fact, I think they may be sponsored by Adobe that explain how to use all these different components. And they give really good examples on how to do it. All right, so there was the Grunge 1, Grunge 2, Grunge 3. All right, how are we doing on time here? Oh my gosh, we hit this almost an hour. It goes by fast. So what questions do you guys have at this point?
I think I'm the only one asking questions.
You've been asking good questions. You've been asking challenging questions. I bet you been sitting there thinking, I'll stump the chump.
I have one quick question. I'm just
Yes.
curious. How much time did you actually spend on that photo? Because it seems a lot of work.
It is a lot of work. And, you know, it's funny. I look at people who do paintings and I think to myself, oh, that must be so time consuming. Well, when you look at how much work goes into one of these things, it can be really time consuming. I originally thought that what I would do is I would take the original image and I would walk you through click by click on the call to do it. Because I thought in a half hour, 45 minutes, I should be able to get through it. So I started. 3 hours later, I finally got to my grunge image here. It literally took me 3 hours. And this is, I've done this before, right? I knew exactly where I wanted to go. I knew exactly the look I wanted and everything. And so it took me a solid 3 hours to get all the way through it. And that's with no trial and error. That's with no, I don't know what I want to do here. So yeah, to your point, it can be very time consuming. It really can. Although, again, that's why I wanted to kind of share the results that you can get on these one-click products like Topaz or Luminar. You can get some really nice effects, right? So if you get something like, start out with something like that and you want this sort of grungy effect with the interesting edges and stuff on it, it's one click and you're there. And that Snapseed that I mentioned to George will run on your iPhone. I think it'll also run on Android. It's free and you can do this kind of stuff all the time. It lets you change the exposure and color temperature and all kinds of stuff. Really, you can have a lot of fun with it.
You
Yeah, we can-
also mentioned about the Snapseed on the phone. Does that work very much in the same way?
Well, it's not gonna let you move parts of the image around like this, but what it's going to let you do is it's going to let you take an image that looks like this, or yeah, let's say an image that looks, let me go back here so I'm getting a fair comparison. It's going to let you take an image that looks like this, which is pretty much like the original came through the process. And it's going to let you do that to it, or it's going to let you do that to it.
I see.
Right.
Okay.
So it's going to give it texture. It's going to give it sort of an emotional appeal. It kind of takes it from an ordinary image to something it's more interesting.
All right. Thank you, John.
All right. So if you don't have any other questions on Photoshop, let me go through. I wrote some notes here and I wanted to. All right, so we went through all of this creative process. Let's just look at some of these thoughts here. All right, so we already talked a little bit about including the original file name as part of the Photoshop file name. So you can keep your sanity and you can go back and find this stuff later. And we also talked about not only use the file name from the camera, but also append the date on there if you want to go back and do different versions. Because what I'll find that I do is I may save every 20 minutes or every half hour, or if I start to do something, I'm not quite sure where it's going to end up, and I don't want to trash my image, I'll save it and then I'll go ahead, because that way you never lose anything. All right, and so never alter your original image, what came out of your camera, never change that, never. Always work on a copy. Let me see, save your work regularly, make a copy of the file from your last session so you can start with a fresh version all the time. Yeah, I always start with a fresh version. So like if I get done editing today, and if tomorrow I start to work on this, instead of the date being,
You're still doing your meeting?
instead of the date being September 15th, the date will say September 16th on it. And so I'll create a new version of the file. This is particularly when I do video editing, but also with Photoshop. Use it all the time. Oh, yeah, here's a tip. When you start to get lots of layers going, it's really a good idea to group them together. So if I click back over on Photoshop here, you can see how I've got a folder called sign, one called Longhorn, one called seating, back wall, select objects, original. I may have, I don't know how many layers I've got here, but I probably have 40 or 50 layers overall. And it can get really confusing what you're working on. So what I find works really well is label it with what it is. So yeah, in the case of the sign, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 layers, one curve layer, and I've got a special effect here. All right, so and those are all bundled under sign. So if I click that, the sign goes away. All right, so just a best practices kind of thing. What else we got here? Oh, if you're trying to do compositing, which as you can see is great fun, what you want to do is you want to have a soft edge on your images, right? This is something that took me a while to kind of get my head around. I would always try to get the sharpest thing I possibly could. And when you paste it onto something else, that sharp edge doesn't look natural, right? So what you want to do is you want to have a bit of a softness to that edge. They call it feathering is the technical term. So 0 is going to be too soft and 100 is going to be way too hard. And so I usually start as 50 as a starting point. I may fiddle back and forth with that, but that's just something that took me a while to figure out. And then the clone stamp tool, we didn't talk much about that. So that's gradients, that's the toughest part. Oh, and then the original image, kind of back to your original question, George, about, geez, do I have to have some big expensive camera? Can I just do this with my phone? Yeah, the camera I used with this was in May 5th, 2014. It was a Sony NEX7, which is so many generations back in Sony cameras. I can't remember how many it is. And it was a 2.1 megabyte file. So not a big file, actually very small file. And it was 6,000 by 3376. So yeah, you don't have to have a full frame $3,000 camera with a $1,000, $2,000 lens on it to do this kind of stuff. You can do it with very humble things.
That's great.
It's kind of like, if you're painting, right? You can buy really expensive brushes and you can buy really inexpensive brushes, and probably it's not that as important as the concept, right?
Well, John, I noticed you're very organized and structured, and you come at it from a photographic point of view. I use Photoshop as a paintbrush.
Yeah.
I use the tools, like you said, it's very lot of work involved, but I use the tools in that lot of work because I'm going by my eye and what my hand can do as far as giving the strokes, you know. So I use it as a painter
Sure.
than a photographer.
Do you have a stylus that you use and a tablet that you use with it?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
And I do a lot of cloning.
Yeah, you do a lot of glow. Yeah. Well, you know what I like about it, George, is that it's a trial and error kind of thing, right? Where if you do something and you don't like it, or you go, whoops, you can always, do Control Z and you just do undo. I really like that feature because, I made this look really easy. I spent literally from the original until I finally had the thing that won the show, the version that won the show. I don't know how many hours I had spent on it, but I had spent a crazy number of hours because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I kind of, like you said, George, I started and I did a little something and it was kind of nice, and I did a little something else and then kept trying stuff. And finally I ended up with the final result that you guys saw, but it's not a linear path at all, right? You try this, you try that, you try this, you try that. You look at it the next day and you say, oh, that's awful. I got to rethink that. All right, that is pretty much what I had. I have one other thing I wanted to talk to you guys about because I need advice and consultation. So we had talked about maybe at some point, I guess I can continue to share here. We talked about maybe doing more of these kinds of things. And, I'm less interested in me like showing different clicks and stuff than I am in perhaps helping you guys get to where you'd like to get to with your photo editing. And so what I was wondering about is whether or not you think this might be an interesting thing to do. I thought we could do another online kind of thing like this, but rather than, pick on an image where I already know where I'm going, what I could do is I could start with an image where I'm not quite sure where I'm going to, and we could see that it's more of an iterative process, a trial and error kind of thing. And then I thought maybe, and we could talk about, actually, I'd like to talk about other skills other than Photoshop to do this too, because you don't need to use Photoshop. Again, this is a dump truck, and sometimes all I want to do is put groceries in the back of my SUV. And so we could talk about that. I talk about AC/DC, which is really a nice tool to use. And so I thought maybe we might spend an hour doing that. And then the other thing I thought, yes, go ahead.
I have a question, and that is what made you say, okay, I need to stretch this. I need to move the sign to a different position. What imagination did you come up with to get that? I'm not sure.
It's a good question, and it's totally gut feel. Right. So what I did is I showed you my starting point and I showed you my end point. But what I didn't show you is all the steps along the way. And I can actually, let's take a look at that real quick. So I want to bring up, so this thing I'm going to bring up here is called AC/DC. And this is what I use to keep track of all my pictures. And this particular picture is _ DSC 6355. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to search for this. And it takes a minute to go back through the data. So these are all the different iterations that I had working on that particular image. So again and again and again, again and again. So how did I know I wanted to move the sign? So originally I had this version. I thought this was great. And all I did is I added one cushion here to the seating, right? And I took the walls and I stretched those out a little bit. But then, I didn't really like the case, and I really didn't like the sun here. So then I went and I did another version, and I did another version. And so finally I came out with, one day I looked at it and said, what would happen if I had a really balanced composition that I was comfortable with? It didn't sort of, because if you look at this, I don't like this composition. The sign's falling off the edge of the picture. I don't mind the lamp here. I definitely don't like this because it's bright and it's a distraction. And I wanted the longhorn a little bit more centered. And so it was an iterative process. A little bit at a time, but yeah, you don't realize how much time you spend on it until you look at the number of versions that you did. And there's some pretty cool stuff that you can do with like watercolor filters and stuff. I can make it look like a watercolor. Yeah, I tried that too.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And it's kind of interesting when you look at DSC 6355. My camera, it only goes up to 9999. It only do 10,000 pictures, and then it rolls over and starts over again. And if you look at the number of versions of DSC 6355, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So I have 11 different sequences where I've gone through 10,000 pictures and come back to renumbering to 6355. So again, one of the things that about this is that when you're working with digital, every picture doesn't cost you anything. Back in the days of film, every picture cost me like 50 cents. But now I can take all I want, and I literally take tens of thousands of pictures. And then, another day we can talk about how to save your pictures and how to keep track of them all. That's an interesting thing. I've got the way I'm set. I have a folder for a year, and then inside of the folder for the year, I have every time I've downloaded pictures, I put them into a folder. Right. So I like for example, on August 24th, I downloaded all these pictures, and I'm working for New Song Church on this project here. And so I put them in the New Song folder here, labeled that. So now there may be other stuff in here. Lots of times there is. Yeah, like this is construction projects I was taking. And sometimes I'll go out and I'll take pictures just because I know I'm going to glue it together with something else. And that's kind of fun. It's kind of like a visual scavenger hunt.
John,
So yes.
are these pictures on your hard drive or on Dropbox or on a portable?
They're on my hard drive. Yep. Yeah,
and
they're all on my hard drive.
You do back it up anywhere?
Yes. We can spend another evening on backups. We definitely could. So what I do is when I download these pictures, I save them on my hard drive, and then I have a NAS, a network attached storage. I've got let me see, 16 terabyte NAS sitting here. And every Sunday morning, I back up everything to the NAS.
Gotcha.
And I also have a couple of Western Digital Passport portable drives, and I back up everything to those. So I have everything backed up, and then also file history, Windows file history. So I have 4 backups of everything. And so I haven't lost anything. I've
been playing around with Dropbox, but I'm not too sure.
Okay. The problem with Dropbox is that I've got too much stuff. I thought I'd do that when we first moved here, which is about a year and a half ago. We signed up for Cox, and it's fiber, and so I've got gigabit up and downloading on my account here. And I thought, well, let's back everything up. It may take a day or so to do it, but why not? Well. So I get this nasty note from Cox after about halfway through the upload saying, I've exceeded my maximum for the entire month. And if I don't stop right now, they're going to start charging me like $5 a megabyte or something the same.
Oh, God. Yeah.
Like, well, no. So unfortunately, I just have too much stuff. Yep. So, but yeah, if it's something that's really, really important, like I keep my portfolio on SmugMug. And so stuff that I want, my grandkids to remember me by, and things that I share with a potential client that I'm going to work for, that stuff ends up in the cloud on in my website. So, but yeah, there's once you got 175,000 images, there's no easy answer to back up.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, John, it's interesting that you give, I think you're giving people the feeling that they have to be very structured on this. And let me tell you, I am terrible in keeping files, and I do things very hard. Looking at what you did, I do them the very hard way, but I use them for a different purpose. I even do sometimes I do my layouts with Photoshop. I did a landscape where I picked a group of mountains, a cactus, a desert scene, a lake, and a few horses. And I put those combinations together, and then that was my composition. Rather than sketching it out, that was my composition that I took as reference for my drawing. So it can be used in a lot of ways, is what my point is. So people might think that they have to be really structured. I am not really structured. I have files all over the place.
Yeah.
But it works for what I'm doing.
Yeah, you got to find something that works for you. There's no one answer that's the correct way to do it. You got to find a way that you're comfortable with. And so one of the nice things about keeping it doesn't make a difference if you keep it in like year folders or anything like that. But one of the things that is kind of nice about using with AC/DC is it lets me put keywords. Let me move you guys out of the way here. I'll move you guys over here. It lets me put keywords on files. And so, and you're only limited by the amount of energy you want to put into it. Like, so I can put keywords I can have as many as I want. There's no limit to how many I can want. But like for example, if I want to see pictures of my grandson, Colin, I click there and there's all the pictures I've got of my grandson, Colin. And some of these are, these have been around for how long? So that was in 2013. So 9 years ago, here he is. And there's his brother right there. And it's really easy. All I do is say, this particular picture, I want to label it. Oh, let me see. Let's see. Where's one here? There's one of me. Oh, it's already labeled. Anyway, sometimes I'm good at this. Sometimes I'm not as good as I could be at it. It comes to your point about how organized you are. But yeah, so I'll do this with people, family, and I also do this with places. And so I got these organized. So like, for example, we lived in Texas for 21 years and I drove around Texas like crazy. And these are all the different towns in Texas. And so there were some towns that were really fun to photograph. And there was one called Granger. And so if I click here, here's Granger, Texas. Granger, Texas got used as a movie set. Movie crews would buy this, they rent the town and they would take the old buildings and they would fix them up and they would use them as a movie set. Anyway, I took lots of pictures in old Granger. So really easy for me to find this stuff. If I want to look in green, this was like a tourist trap there. There's that one right there.
John, you have a few questions on chat.
Oh yeah, let me.
Eric's asking for the names of the software you used. And Mary, where did you go to get the watercolor filter? And I know that's in the software itself.
Software. All right, let's do that first. All right, so Topaz Remask. And that's going to be for extractions. I sound like a dentist. All right. And What else do we use?
What was that one from the?
Oh, Luminar, the one from
Luminar.
Ukraine. They have 3 or 4 different products, but if you look up Luminar, that's to give you the one-click kind of thing. And
Yeah.
that's going to be PC and Mac. And then for your phone is Snapseed.
Well,
All right, so you're challenging me here on the watercolor thing. Let me go.
well, isn't that just a filter that you have already?
It's an action that I downloaded for free, but I can't tell you what it's called. Let me give you a sec here, and I'll track it down quick here. Let me just.
On the old Photoshop that I have, it's a filter.
Yes, and the one I used was I guess it called. Let's bring this one up here. What is that thing called? It's an action. Window.
Something like
actions.
the gaze.
Watercolor artist, it's called.
Oh, okay.
Watercolor artist action set. Let me write that down for you guys. Oh, where'd it go? It's
Okay.
and I want to say I had downloaded that from Adobe's Creative Cloud, but I think if you search for this, you'll find it. It was free, and
Yeah.
it's just an action, and it takes about maybe 2 minutes to run. You turn it on, and it just like puts about 100 different layers over the top of your image, and you
Yeah.
can control whether you have spatters and how big your spatters are and what color they are. You can imagine you can control way more than you actually want to.
Right.
But it's fun. I've done an awful lot with that. I had a lot. In fact, I was going to like turn that loose on the gallery for a show sometime.
Isn't the
But then I look
water,
at
I'm sorry, isn't the watercolor filter, so to speak, isn't that in effects?
all right, let's do that quick here. Let me share my screen again.
When I was taking classes at UNLV, they did have a thing for this program, but it's so much information.
Yeah.
For Photoshop? Uh-oh, Zoom just quit on me.
Well, I work. No, you're still there. You're still there. You're still connected.
Okay, I just got an error message saying Zoom just crashed.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh, I need to close something down here.
We still see you.
We see your screen.
This. No. All right, I got too much going on here. And it can't keep up with it.
Oh,
Did I
okay.
lose you? Oh no, you're still here. Oh, all right, we're good.
Yeah, we're still.
All right, so what I want to do, let me close this down. And let me close. Let me not close that down. I'm going to ask you that question. I'll forget.
I'd
All
like
right.
to get that Topaz if I could bring that into my version of Photoshop, that would be great.
Yeah, look at the standalone version of that one where it's actually going to output like a JPEG file for you, or maybe a PNG, something like that. And you just suck that into your version of Photoshop. It shouldn't make any difference at all about what version you got.
Yeah.
I think it goes back to CS6, George.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, so let's
I
just-
refuse to go the subscription route. That just makes me cringe.
It's crazy expensive. You know, it'd be one thing if I was working as a graphic artist and I was getting paid $100,000 a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, then I can understand. But you know, I'm a retired guy living on Social Security, right?
Yeah.
And so it doesn't make sense to me to have to pay $60 a month.
Well, it's the whole mechanism of software now. You know, they used to get all the bugs out And now they said, okay, let's just send it out there with the bugs in it because the users will let us know where the bugs are.
Right.
You know, they just got so lazy about everything. And living in Seattle where, you know, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs were, you know, it was crazy about software. So,
All right, let me see if I can show this to you guys here. We'll do this as the last thing here. So I'm going to share Photoshop. And with any kind of luck, this won't crash. All right, screen sharing. All right, we're good. All right, so now I picked this kind of random picture because I think this will actually look kind of cool if we watercolor it. All right, and so, you know, as I always tell you guys, I'll always duplicate my background so I never trash my original. And I'm going to come over here to Actions, and I've got this thing called Watercolor Artist Photoshop Action Set. And the first thing I do is I click Setup, and I click the little action button, and it doesn't do anything except say setup's completed. And it's going to say continue. And so now what it wants me to do is it wants me to say, okay, what do you want to have actually be your watercolor painting? And I'm going to say, all right, what I want to do is I just want to do this sign right here. That's really my subject, and the rest of it, this is kind of noise. So I think I'll just do that. And maybe I'll extend it up a little into the palm tree because it's cool. All right, so just a little bit like that. But I specifically want to leave off the detail over here on the left-hand side. And so now that I've done that, I said, that's what I want to work with. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to click Watercolor Artist. Excuse me. And I'm going to click Go. And now my little cursor is going to spin. And you're going to see the layers get created again and again and again. And now this is probably going to run maybe a minute or two. It actually takes a little while for this to happen. And eventually, once it gets going, you'll see the image kind of evolve on the screen. So now that I've told you the secret, I suspect that the next juried show we'll have will be filled with watercolor images where there was actually no water used. The secret is out. But hey, if you put it under glass, they can't prove there wasn't a real watercolor. All right, it's chugging away. If I actually went through and counted this and there were 50 layers that this created, I wouldn't be shocked. So it's going and going.
Well, I went to see an art show that showed movie stars' portraits that they had used special effects through Photoshop. And I told the gallery owner that the artist must have used Photoshop. He says, oh, no, he doesn't know anything about computers. And you know how you can make the wiggly lines of your faces in Photoshop. And he swore up and down the artist didn't do that. And it was a full show that he had done all of these paintings of movie stars.
Huh. There's a guy, I think his name is Peter Lick, who's got a gallery in Caesar's Palace.
Mm-hmm.
And he has these giant prints and he gets like, you know, thousands of dollars for them. And they're beautiful. He does a great job. But you go in there and you talk to the people and you say, gosh, he does a wonderful job with Photoshop. Oh, no, he never touches Photoshop. This is exactly how it came out of the camera. Yeah, BS.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, right. Yeah, believe that and you'll believe anything.
There's a lot of artists doing that. But I mean, Photoshop fools a lot of people, you know? So.
I'm totally convinced that it's a perfectly legitimate way to express your art.
Well, John, I really admire all of these things that you've done and the skill that you have using Photoshop here. But I have to say that because I'm not a photographer at all, this is actually scary to me. When you can take that photo that you started with and then double the size of the seats and, move things around, and it looked like, no, that's real.
Yeah.
And obviously it's not. And that's a little bit scary to some of us.
It should be.
Because you can't, it says you really can't believe anything you see anymore.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
It's very scary. It is extremely scary.
Oh, and there we go. Now it's complete.
It's getting there.
There we go. Probably 60 or 70 layers later.
Yeah.
There you go. So it really looks like a watercolor. And actually the rest of the motel here looks kind of like somebody did it with pencil, doesn't it? Kind of like it's penciled in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So Christy, to your point, you can really do some convincing stuff. And the more that you fiddle with it, the more convincing you can make it, with little drop shadows and little subtle things that you do. Yeah, you can really make it look, very convincing.
Absolutely.
But the goal here, my goal anyway, is to have fun doing this. Share this with other people and just sort of create. This is all about the creative process. And so I don't have the talent to do it with oils, and I don't have the patience to do it with watercolor. But I'm sure okay with clicking the mouse. This is my pen and my brush right here. Clicking the old mouse.
Well, this has been good, John. This is really.
Can I stick one more thing in here?
Yeah, absolutely.
George, you mentioned earlier that you use like a pen, with your thing. So
Yes.
there's a piece of software called Astropad. And what it does is it allows you to use your iPad and a pencil, iPad and a pencil as a like a Wacom. And you work on your iPad and it shows up like your computer screen can show up on your iPad. And you can draw right on it. It's called Astropad, and it works with Mac or Windows.
Can you
it's
type
really neat
that into
because-
the chat window, Pat?
I'm sorry, what?
Can you put the name of that product in the chat window for
Yes,
all
I
of
will.
us?
And I've used it before. And I tell you, on my iPad, it's just my whole computer screen is now on my iPad, and I'm using my pencil and just doing whatever I need to, and then it just put it back. So
I'd love to try that.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
you load it onto your.
It's just a little icon. You put it on your computer and you put it on your iPad. And then, when you start it up, it'll say looking for your computer or looking for your iPad. And then, if you have an iPad that has a pencil, you just draw right on your iPad, but it
Gotcha.
shows up on your computer.
Oh, I might try that too.
Yeah. And it was not very expensive when I bought it, believe me.
Okay.
I know that was a while ago, so they probably made it expensive, but I don't know. I check it out.
Well, one of the things, like I said, living in Seattle for a while,
Astropad.
Microsoft was known for having people come in with ideas that needed work. I mean, some of these apps that you see, it's taken them a year, 2 years to do when it's a small group of individuals come together. But if the word leaked out to Microsoft, they would immediately put 20 people on this project and have it out in a week. And I remember talking to a woman that worked at Microsoft, and she said she had a friend that was working on a thing that took him 2 years to do. And Microsoft got wind of it somehow, and they had it out before he finished. So these apps are really the big deal right now as far as digital goes. There's so many of them out there, and so, a lot of them are great. They're fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
But John, I want to close this down. We went over, which I was grateful because the stuff you presented was really great, and I appreciate your time on doing this. Does anybody else have any questions? Okay, because he could go on for days. I mean, I worked with Photoshop for 10 years, and I remember my boss talking to somebody and saying, "George, how long you been working with Photoshop?" And I said, 10 years. He said, "Do you know all there is to know?" I said, "No, I don't think I've scratched the
Not even
surface."
close. Not even close.
But Adobe products are fantastic. Acrobat I remember the lead guy for Adobe came out and said, look, for all you guys out there, and he had a room full of computer geeks. And he said, if any of you guys out there think you know all there is to know about Acrobat, you don't, because we don't. And he was a lead guy for him. So these software packages that they put together are phenomenal. There's so much stuff that you can do with them. I use Acrobat for presentations where I did voiceovers. Nobody know, you say, oh, Acrobat, that's not, they think it's just a PD program. No, PDF program. And it's not. There's so much stuff to it, but Photoshop has got a wealth of depth to it that I don't think anybody's really found the bottom. So, but thank you for presenting that.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thanks everybody for sharing. I really enjoyed this.
But this is what member meetings should be, is educational. So next members meeting, Christy's gonna do show us how to use Google, and in some ways do the 55 minutes, I think it is, of how to use it as Zoom. So that might be cost effective for us cheap people that can't afford all these fancy things. But don't let what John is so organized, it's embarrassing, because I got files all over the place. But I think like an